Good evening and welcome to tonight's Housing Joint Work Session for Thursday, November 14th. I'm going to pass it to Suzanne Woodland, Deputy City Manager, to go over the process to date, potential next steps.
Thank you. Suzanne Woodland, Deputy City Manager and Regulatory Counsel. So we're going to cover two things right out the gate, a quick review of the process that has occurred to date, and then give you some suggestions for potential next steps. So first off, for anyone who is not familiar, this process began with a request for qualifications. The city solicited 8 statements of interest and qualification packages from firms that were interested in providing permanent below-market housing to the Sherburne property. The city manager, after receiving the proposals, the packages, prepared a selection committee comprised of 8 city staff. Those 8 city staff were the Peter Rice, Director of Public Works, Joe Alameda, Facilities Manager, Shanti Wolf, Chief Building Inspector, Sean Clancy, Assistant City Manager for Economic and Community Development, and then from our Planning and Sustainability Department, Peter Britz, the Director, Peter Stiff, the Planning Manager, Jillian Harris, Principal Planner, and Howard Snyder, the Housing Navigator. So this committee of city staff reviewed, discussed, and scored the statements of qualifications received from 8 firms. All those statement of qualifications received as part of the RFQ, which was 5224, are available on the Sherburne project page on the city's website. Now, the 4 highest ranking firms from that initial process were Avesta, Penrose, Portsmouth Housing Authority, and Preservation of Affordable Housing, which we often call POA for short. Those are in alphabetical order only. The 4 highest ranking firms were invited then to submit proposals in response to an RFP 0925. Now that request for proposal document was developed by city staff with input from the Assistant Mayor and Councilors Tabor and Moreau in their capacity as the Blue Ribbon Housing Committee Council representatives. The RFP contained detailed information on the scoring criteria that would be used to evaluate the proposals. Those criteria included the following categories: evaluation of various design elements for 2 different housing concepts, one with existing building remaining in place and one without the building. It also included criteria related to cost, budget, and financial feasibility. In addition, property management was considered, community engagement, and implementation plan and timeline. The proposals were received from each of the 4 invited firms, and the same selection committee of city staff was reconvened to review and score the proposals. A master score sheet was created to capture both the subtotals for each category evaluated and the total of all scores. POA scored highest, followed by PHA and Penrose. Avesta was 4th. The master score sheet is available on the city's Sherburne project page along with all of the proposals received. The selection committee also provided some general observations on the proposals, which are also available on the Sherburne project page. So members of the selection committee are here tonight in the event that the city council or the housing committee members have questions regarding the content of the proposals that the committee reviewed. We recognize that these were weighty submissions, and we certainly found it helpful to talk together about them because we could compare who might have overlooked a paragraph somewhere that discussed, for example, the timeline or schedule. In addition, to the extent that there are general questions about public work infrastructure, building codes, or housing types, or zoning questions, the selection committee can respond within their respective disciplines and roles in the city. It is also important as you have your discussion tonight to keep in mind that the proposals show concepts. So proposers were notified of this joint work session tonight. They were advised that they were welcome to attend the public meeting, but there was no expectation that they would present or respond to questions this evening. City councilors and housing committee members were asked not to have contact with representatives of any of the entities that submitted proposals until the preferred candidate was selected as part of a public meeting and agreements executed. So that's the summary of the process to date. Now, the Sherburne page has been populated with the proposals, with the score sheet, with the comments from the selection committee staff for at least 2 weeks now, and that was, intended to give everyone some time to take a look at those in advance, and that's why we're not going to go through them all tonight. So what we're looking for is to begin to get some consensus in terms of next steps. So the consensus of the selection committee was that the proposals contain sufficient information upon which the city council could select a preferred candidate. That stated, if the city council wishes to interview and ask questions of any or all of the proposers prior to selecting a preferred candidate, that could certainly be arranged. As you know, this is a very atypical procurement process, given that it concerns the long-term disposition of a piece of municipal property and involves ongoing and unresolved policy decisions, such as whether to retain the existing building on the site. I caution, however, that the preferred candidate should be identified no later than December 16th, 2024, the City Council meeting. The timelines for construction of housing outlined in the proposals may slip for 3 of the 4 proposers if there is significant delay. It will likely take at least a month to negotiate and finalize documents related to any of these proposals. These negotiated documents will need to be approved by the City Council. As part of your discussion tonight, we have slides of the concept plans as well as excerpts from the master score sheet available if they are needed for discussion purposes. So with that brief summary and overview, I will turn it over to the mayor.
Thank you, Suzanne. Are there questions of the council or the Housing Blue Urban Committee? Councilor Bagley.
Thank you, Your Honor. There was, we received a email communication about somebody that had contacted the city after the proposal end date, and it was said that if we wanted to look at it, we could, and this would be the time to talk about it. Could you expound upon that? Because I don't really understand that.
Sure. So typically, as part of a procurement process, once proposals are submitted, the record is effectively closed unless and until there are interviews. And the reason for that, and particularly in this case, is that the proposals from all the other candidates and firms have been posted on the website. So if you are going to allow one firm to submit additional information, you would want to allow all the firms to submit additional information out of fairness. And so that's why it is a conversation, which might become moot if the city council decides that they would like to interview one or more of the candidates, because that would be an appropriate time then to bring up some supplemental information. So that's why it kind of sits where it does. So we were trying to respect the existing process and not favor any one candidate by allowing some information in without an opportunity for others.
And follow-up to that is, at least in my professional experience when I deal with universities or government agencies, we're told that after the bids are submitted, we're not allowed to, as the person looking to win the business, to contact until we're contacted. Was that made clear to the organizations, or is that not this type of proposal?
So we have made clear to obviously the city council members, as you recall, and the housing committee members, that there should be no contact, and it would be typical for proposers not to reach out, but we have indicated to some of the firms that to make it clear that you have been directed not to have direct contact.
Great, thank you.
Okay, I guess, no other questions. Suzanne, I thought we would review the actual work to date and the rank ordering of the firms. Did I see Eric?
Whether it's time for the type of questions, but
Eric,
it was.
I'm sorry, will you just pull your mic
I'm
closer?
sorry.
It's on.
All right. Whether it's time for this type of question, but I mean, the information was volumetric and, you had to really look into, some of the detail of each proposal. And there was drastic differences in them, to some respect. And then trying to score them individually amongst ourselves, we could see, advantages and disadvantages. But how is this going to enter into, let's say, the differences between two developers, one that would not do anything with the school, somebody that would do something with the school, the time frame of their dates of, their projected, dates of completion of the project. Whether a component of their proposal was going to possibly have, require some city involvement with some financial city involvement, those things. Those are some of the distinctions that I think were noted by the selection committee, and then, still stand out to be questions that need to have some type of detail as we move on in this discussion. That's all.
If I may, so I think to the extent you are looking for clarification of information that is in the proposals, we have 3 members of the selection committee sitting here who have reviewed them carefully, as well as other members of the selection committee. So if you think it is an item that may be already addressed in the proposal, and as we agree and concur, they were hefty, which is why we did the scoring process that we did to help, I think, we hope, you look at that whole process. If it's something that has been unanswered in your mind from reviewing a proposal, I think that goes to the list of questions that one might want to ask one or more of the proposing firms, in which case, if the city council would like to make that opportunity happen in some forum so that you can hear in a public setting what those responses are, that's part of this conversation too. Are there questions that you feel were absolutely unanswered sufficiently by the proposers that you want an opportunity to hear directly from proposers on items that are still of questions? Because we certainly had some questions, but we also felt there was sufficient information that if you wanted to proceed directly with one proposal, you could, and there would be due diligence, negotiation, and we'd be bringing back to the city council documents and further definition of concepts. So that's why we have flexibility in terms of how the city council would like to proceed with this process.
So Eric, another way, so typically an RFP in the city goes through, city manager is completely in control of an RFP and makes a selection based on the facts available. It's different because we have to lease land here, and ultimately that comes up to the city council to do. And so there's a different process with regard to the RFP, because ultimately it's a decision of the council, and we look for input from the housing committee around that. There are deadlines that start to encroach upon that decision-making process. And so we'd like to be able to have as many of the questions that we have, and this would be a place for some of those questions, or maybe to outline some of the questions that still remain open as part of this discussion, so that we can move forward in either interviewing the participants to have further clarity around that. But it's different than a typical RFP, and that's why we're trying to, like procuring software. The city council's not going to make a decision on which finance software we're going to use. But because we ultimately have the authority to lease this land, we have to be able to make that decision, and that's why it's slightly different in this RFP and why we're having this meeting here. But would love to hear any questions that anybody has in terms of reviewing the documents to be able to better help select a applicant moving forward. Yep.
If you have any, Eric.
Feel free to.
This is not a normal RFQ procedure. It's not a standalone, list. So we have 4 proposers with 2 proposals within their proposal. So we have 8 proposals to kind of look over, with each one of them having certain, details to them, with the school, without the school. I mean, I wish we could even get to that particular, if there's any idea or preference from where a decision is going to be made of, does a school remain or does a school, is a school demolished? And that's with what has been submitted in each one of these proposals. So, I mean, that's kind of a milestone of, once you get over that, then you can get a little deeper into each proposal as you've indicated, whether the school's going to remain or not, and the density and some of the other attributes that the developers have submitted. So those are the things that remain as questions in my mind, to know if there's going to be any resolution in this type of format or somewhere along the way to understand what's going to happen.
Thank you. To that fact, Eric, were we looking at, as you just said, 8 different proposals? I would ask the selection committee, when you looked at these in the grading process, did you look at them as 8, or as did you grade them as 1? So a good example is POA. Obviously, everyone submitted an option with the school, without the school. When we were looking at the grading and the qualifications and some of the criteria, were you looking at the 8 individual, or the 2 options as 1 and grading them as a whole, a complete package? I think that kind of is asking what Eric is leading to.
I think that's a distinctive mark of where to proceed after that, because all of a sudden, when you come to some conclusion that, whether it's pro-school, the school remains, the school's gone, then you've narrowed the field. And now you can keep narrowing the field down into some type of, discussion that benefits the purpose.
Suzanne?
To respond, when we tallied up all of the numbers, you'll see on the very last bit of the score sheet that I broke them out by total, and also by individual as 1, using scenario 1 and then using scenario 2. And in scenario 1 and scenario 2 and in total, POA was first ranked and PHA second. Penrose third.
Dagan?
Yeah, and then on those same rankings, the top score was for removing the school. So that was under POHA, or POA.
POA. That's how we've been doing.
They scored a 272, and that was the highest score. So does that reflect the city's preference, or is that just, we went through the rubric, we scored them based on each criteria, and this is how it ended up?
If you'd like, Mayor, I can tell you that we literally we used the rubric, which was the same rubric that was in the RFP. So we stuck very much to the published RFP on the scale of 1 to 5 and just worked our way through. Or I should say the selection committee did. I was the scorekeeper.
So I guess what we're just trying to hone in on, is there a preference from the city to retain the school or to remove the school in favor of more housing?
I would say yes and no, because really it's the development partner that we are looking for. If you look at them, in my view, holistically, I would be okay with either of these options from this developer. because both of them submitted options with or without this, all of them submitted options with or without the school. So that's an option no matter which one of the potential partners we go with. So I looked at it as with or without, I like this plan. With or without, I do like this, I don't like that.
So then that becomes a question that we're trying to hone in on at a meeting like this.
Yes, is the partnership not, again, and I think Suzanne touched on this, these are all conceptual designs. So we're not really, in my personal view, I'm not really looking at exactly what could be knocked down, could be built. That does take into, obviously, some of the criteria, but within these and within the RFPs of what developer I'm looking to work with.
If I may, I'd like to add to the conversation as somebody that helped formulate the RFP. And the reasons why we requested the scenario with or without the school is because of the public comments that have been brought up. But to get to a place where it could be decided if the school was to remain or not, the RFP requested that the implications be discussed to explain that. And what I mean by that is it's for discussion, hopefully tonight. The Housing Committee has had dialogue that they want to see housing units created, not only in number, but in the varying levels of affordability. There's also written into the RFP about the implications of if it's removed, there's more housing, and what does that more housing represent? The trade-offs that I hope get discussed tonight is that if the school remains, then there may be less housing, but then there's going to be, I believe, greater community assets. So as there's the questions being posed that I hear just now of, well, is the school going to stay or not? There needs to be discussion about if it stays or not. So it can be weighed about what the preference is going to be. The selection committee wrote into their numbers how they identified what the solutions were going to be. And so if you look at the rankings of the scenario, keeping the school and not, you can see what the preference is from the selection committee. So the housing committee, I hope, has discussion about here about if they prefer to see the school removed because it creates more housing, or do they seek a balance between the benefits of keeping the school and having a few less units? What does that do for implications to what the Housing Committee has been discussing?
Yeah, I didn't see, I was slightly surprised in terms of some of or just that there wasn't an enormous amount gained in terms of housing units with the reduction of the school. And so, all things being equal, there's a significant amount of support in the neighborhood adjacent for the school and the memories therein. So it seemed like if it can be turned into community space and drawn, more communities together, seemed like a net positive in terms of one of them referenced other organizations reaching out. I think it was Seacoast Community School. Like if there was an opportunity to get, daycare facilities within new housing, seems like a win-win there. So looking at that opportunity seemed like a net benefit for the entire city of Portsmouth, as well as the adjacent neighborhood. But, I don't know. It seemed like, I guess from the perspective that I'm looking at, the rank ordering seems the same regardless of the option that is considered. And so being able to have the best process going forward to be able to make a decision around what we've been presented with, since the rank ordering is the same regardless of whether or not we include the school or not, could be a broader discussion as we move forward through the Housing Committee specifically, and then as it comes to the City Council on what the priority is. I think I have not necessarily a strong preference, but there's a lot to be gained through there that seems like a reasonable, since there's not a bunch of difference between the different proposers, to be able to make a decision based on that seems like an easier way forward. But Jen, you had a question or a comment?
Yeah, no, just more a comment sort of about process, because I think one of the things that we've heard is important throughout this whole process, and I think was reflected in these RFPs really well, was that we're hoping to get more community input. And so I think while it's great to have 8 incredible designs on the table, I don't want us to get wedded to any particular one, because I think whoever we choose could take the best of all 8 designs and come up with something even better with, most importantly, the input from the community. For me, one of the things that I didn't see reflected, and I'm wondering if the selection committee thought through this, was really more meat on the bone about how these developers are going to manage the building. I think particularly with my own background, knowing, anybody can build a beautiful building, but the experience of the people living there is really going to be dependent on those people who are managing the day-to-day. Who are you calling at 2 a.m. when a pipe bursts? And that really, I didn't see much meat on that here, and wondering if you guys thought through that very much.
So let me grab a couple of things. Before we lose it, I just want to point out that there is an important point in terms of keeping the building, which is 3 of the 4 firms, if I am correct, would anticipate that there would be a financial contribution necessary to make that work. So just from the city. Now, to your point, there was an RFQ process, request for qualifications process beforehand, where that was where some of the meat was in terms of each of the firms' history of performance in that function of property management. So we certainly, again, the selection committee members can speak up or weigh in, but what I heard as part of that qualifications process, and that was part of it, do they have sufficient property management experience that they make it to this last round? So it was somewhat addressed earlier in the RFQ process.
Sort of as a hurdle. I don't
Yes.
see it reflected as a 1 through 5 here, which I sort of wish it were weighted a little bit more. Because like I said, I think anybody can build a beautiful building. I think that's important, but the experience of the people living there is going to be pretty affected.
I certainly think everyone would agree with you. Yeah.
Councilor Cook?
Thank you, Your Honor. I have a question around the retention of the school building and how much of that is determined by the ability to secure funding. I noticed in a few of the proposals, the funding mechanisms change slightly depending upon whether or not you keep the school. So at that stage, when funding is either secured or not, do the plans change? Or how much flexibility is there to change plans? Say some of the funding mechanisms change.
Does someone from the selection committee want to talk at all about that in any further detail? Because we did see that in the proposals.
Well, I'll speak and then Peter. Kate, I recognized in the proposals something similar to that you spoke about. The funding mechanism is in place to address a certain type of development of the school. There is mention of different grants that were available as well. I appreciate the concern of that, well, if they don't get it, then we can't keep the school. But I believe that each one of the proposals spoke of the ability to get funds to do, in one instance, there was 7 or 8 units. There was even an option where if they couldn't get some funding, then they would remove the gymnasium, and because the funding was dependent on creating more of a community benefit. And as was spoken, 3 of the 4 are dependent upon the city giving more than just the lease agreement as well to protect the school. So those are the things that need to be weighed. There's different grants, and they may or may not come out of fruition, but in the weighting, there was consideration given to some entities that could self-fund a little bit more than others.
Okay, Andrew's had his hand up, and then Assistant Mayor and Councilor Tabor.
Thank you, Your Honor. And my personal goal tonight is that, I think all 4 firms gave good, projects. Any one of them is viable. They all have their pros and cons. But I think what we should do, or hopefully what we can do, is build a consensus on who we want to go with. And the criteria that I've been using as I've been studying this is, who has the best financial resources, which reduces the need for the city to contribute, who gives the most options, and who gives the most, some of these proposals had more of a neighborhood feel, which I prefer, versus the large building feel. But I think any one of these firms could do that. They could incorporate from the different proposals. So what I want to figure out tonight is, who do we think has the best resources and the best vision to execute this? We pick that firm, and then just to use one, the POA proposal on page 67, they have a beautiful timeline about community engagement. And I feel like when we involve the community, that's when we talk about, do we keep the school or not keep the school? How many buildings we have on site? We can get into the specifics. I don't want people to think what we pick for a proposal is exactly what we're going to build, because I don't think there's any chance of that happening, just because logistically it probably couldn't happen. But we certainly wouldn't want to do that without community outreach. So what I would like to see us focus on is, who do we think gives the best capabilities to the city from a financial and capability standpoint, along with the vision that they proposed, and who do we think is going to be best at working with the community to craft that final project. And I think the sooner we pick that winner, and again, I think all four would be capable of it, then we can move on to the specifics of, do we keep the school or not keep the school? Does the city have to contribute financially to the project or not contribute financially to the project? So those are my personal thoughts.
Assistant Mayor, thanks,
Thank
Councilor.
you. This,
Assistant Mayor, and then we'll go to John.
okay. Sorry, John. This is a question for the selection committee and scoring committee, and really looking at you up there, Joe. When we're talking about the school and the integrity of the school, that I guess I have major questions about the safety of building within the school. When we talk about green, and I appreciate the focus on green building and energy awareness, and this, and obviously we know it's always more green to keep a building, but I really worry and wonder about the structural integrity of the building, about the actual cost of repairing the building. And as Joe, a facilities director, I just think about maybe some people in the community have been in there, but maybe some have not. I had a little through Big Brothers Big Sisters who went through all 4 years of high school in that building, and so I spent an ample amount of time. And when you actually explore and go down the hallways and go through the building, you can see how much repair is needed in that building. And so my concern in general is that, is it a safe building to house people? Are we concerned that, the repair, we looked at the school, as a community repairing it to just as it is, and that financial impact. And so I guess my question after all of that is, how much of that data was made available for these 4 finalists?
Before Joe speaks, I just would like to introduce it and just add to the discussion that was made about process.
Yes.
As soon as the proposal was issued, it was noticed to each of the invited proposers that there'd be a site walk. Mm-hmm. And so we invited every team to come walk the site with the selection committee, and that included a tour interior of the building.
Thank you.
Thank you. The answer is very straightforward. The building could easily be saved. It could be retrofitted to the highest standards of energy efficiency, to safety. It's not a very large building. It's a one-story building. It's a solid building, but it does need a lot. But so what? We've done that before many times. I think everyone on the committee was savvy enough to understand that could be done. I think the bigger question was, if we could just get to a place where we decide if we want the building or not, we could move forward either way. We could have a successful project either way. And I felt that from other members, and that is clearly my opinion. But it could be a wonderful building to restore. Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
John, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Your Honor. First of all, I just want to make one quick comment. I, in my working world, was responsible for responding to RFPs for my company, and I probably dealt with at least dozens of RFPs. I want to say that I want to congratulate the city manager and the staff for the job that they did. This is not something that they do all the time, but they put together a tremendous RFP that was well-designed, well laid out, and provided appropriate criteria to evaluate the responses. So I first of all just want to say thank you for taking on this project, and thank you for the professional way in which you dealt with it. And secondly, I just want to agree with Councilor Bagley completely, and the fact is that I think this is a process that the way to move it forward is to not look at the details of the various proposals. That was done by the committee looking at the criteria. I think at this point in time, the best way, from my perspective, to move forward is to select a firm and determine, someone that you can work with. I know you can work with all of them. That's certainly, they've all proven themselves. But I think that once you choose a firm and look at the various programs, get the public input, then you can move this forward. So I would agree completely with your thoughts. I think that's the way to move forward. And don't get too bogged down with the details, because those things will be worked out. So thank you.
I guess on that note, I would ask and open for discussion with this, everyone here. When I look at the top two, I'm excited about both of them, but really comes to mind one key question is do we have a priority for a local developer who's done this, or are we more open to somebody from outside of our neighborhood? So I guess that would be, as has said, that we're looking to try to select somebody. I think that's a major question that I think should be maybe discussed within this group. Is there a preference? Oh, sorry.
Andrew had his hand up first, so I'll let him go first.
Oh,
Andrew, you already had a good comment. You sure we want to?
Well, I think this is the most important part of it.
Oh, Rich. Oh, okay. Rich did have his hand up, but okay. Andrew, then Councilor Blaylock.
I think this is the crux of the matter. If you look, so there's one developer that is, I would say, hyper local, but if you look at the teams, some of the individuals on every team are local, and some of the individuals are, the architecture firm or the structural engineer firm or the land use lawyer. Like, each team has people that are local and that are from not the local community. I think if we were just going to go with a local developer, we're kind of wasting our time here. We tried that route. We got a tremendous amount of pushback from the community. I think what we need to do is pick the best 100-year project and not be concerned with, who we know the best.
Respond to that.
We'll go to Councilor Blaylock, and then some hands rose over there, so I'll go with them. And then, Councilor Tabor has been, after Councilor Blaylock, Councilor Tabor.
Thank you. No, and I agree with everything that's been said slowly. We're trying to measure all these things out. Do we save the school? Do we give up the school and try to go for more number of units, under the 100% AMI? As the mayor said, it appeared that we didn't gain that many units by getting rid of the school. That was actually a surprise to me, and I do think there is a strong sentiment to save the school. I think that's kind of a Portsmouth tradition. All the old elementary schools around town have been converted into housing, a lot of them affordable housing. I appreciate all the scoring that's been done by the selection committee. There's a lot of work went into this, I can tell, a lot of detail. And clearly the POA and PHA kind of rise above the other two. That being said, I noticed on one of the applications that POA was going to use some credits they'd gotten from a development in Dover, to help fund this one. So that made me think, oh, well, they use some credits they get from this project to go fund another project in another community, not Portsmouth. We do have a relationship with PHA. They are the biggest landlord in Portsmouth. I grew up on Greenleaf Ave, right next to Wamaset Apartments, and that's where all my friends lived in Wamaset. I remember Mayor McCachran was jealous of my neighborhood because we had more kids. Every time he'd come over, and we had a full 5-on-5 basketball game, or not as many ghost runners in the baseball game. But PHA's been here. They manage the most number of units in Portsmouth. They're the largest landlord. We have this great relationship with them. They were created by the city council. The mayor, you appoint people to the PHA, correct, to their board? I might be a little biased, growing up next to them. My father used to serve on the PHA, but I grew up with Ruth Griffin serving on the PHA. So that's what the PHA kind of means to me. So that is worth a lot. It's probably worth, 300 points or something on the scale here that we've been given. But I'll say that POA and PHA have proven that they rise above. But the 41 years that I've lived next to PHA, they've also proved that they're a good neighbor and they know how to take care of their tenants.
Councilor Tabor.
Thanks, Mayor. I think when it comes to, do we want to favor a local developer in this? The city's putting up the land in this, and I think the city needs to get the most out of this partnership that it can, because for the multi-million-dollar piece of property that we're putting in. So that to me says we go with the person who will give us the best overall development and is the strongest overall developer, rather than a local bias. Now, it's true that if PHA were the choice, the management fees and the very small amount of income they get as a nonprofit would help build their capacity. And it's, I swallow hard when I think we wouldn't enable them to do that. But I think we have to look at, for the very valuable piece of land we're putting in, who's our best developer, our highest ranked developer. Second, what we aimed for in putting together the RFP was a couple of things. We wanted to have a lot of, not just one bedroom apartments. There's a real need for 2 and 3 bedrooms. And we envisioned this as a place that young couples could go, maybe couples with a kid, so that there could be family presence. We also wanted to have diversity of income range, and I think all of the candidates addressed that. But it was really important that we have 30% of the average income all the way up to 80% of the average income. We have, and we have diversity of units because, there needs to be a roof over everyone's head at various income levels where they live their life. And lastly, we looked at community space and creating a neighborhood, and we felt that we didn't want to have just one big tall building. And that's in the criteria that you see. So we wanted to prioritize families, diverse income range, more neighborhood feel, less large single building. And when it came to the school, we initially had thought, let's require that to be refitted. I'm glad we didn't. Our discussion was that could be an albatross. It could prevent a higher number of units. It could also have financial hooks, as some of the developers have told us. So I think it's good to have the option to not use the school and to look at it and compare. I think Andrew did a really good job of succinctly saying what the criteria are. I know for myself, there's a minimum number of units I want to see us get to make an impact. And I think it's got to be more than 80 to me. And that's just, I've always been consistent about that. I do favor something that has more of a neighborhood feel. For example, you've seen the POA proposal breaks up the mass and has green space around. And I think that is a criteria that we put in here that they answered. And we want a range of income is important, but I think all the applicants did that. The financial strength is important, as Andrew says. You want to be confident that we're turning this property over to somebody who will see this through. For me, also time to market. You know, some of these proposals were strung out over 4 years. We can't wait that long. So there's value to me in the top two who were able to, in the case of PHA, have units by 2027, in the case of POA a year later. But a year later that was complete with no extra phases. So, you know, I think, what are your criteria that you have? And that's where our discussion can really move forward.
So just to set some, we're in a work session, so we can't technically vote as much as maybe it comes out, people have a strong preference. Still has to go to the Housing Committee, still has to come back to the council to vote on that. So there's not going to be just if you're watching at home and thinking that, man, I really wish I had gone to this meeting to get into public comment because we're about to make a decision on this. We are supporting the decision that will eventually be made, but we have to have a vote. You can't have a vote right now. So I saw Councilor Denton, and then was Jen, and then Dagan. Oh, okay, and then Megan. Did Byron have his sneaky hand up too? All right, sneaky hand up. All right.
Thank you, Your Honor. I have a comment and a question for the Deputy City Manager. I do not see this being the only opportunity that these developers will have in the city of Portsmouth, where once this goes out the door, I'd like to see other properties go through the same process. So whatever developer is not chosen this time, hopefully they would apply if this is done again. The question for the Deputy City Manager is, and I do not have the RFP in front of me, but how much weight did the RFP say would be given to firms that were more local than regional, if it even addressed that?
It did not address that. It addressed the 6 criteria that I outlined. So local was not emphasized. It was design, cost, number of units, the look, property management experience, community engagement, timeline.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going Jen, Dagan, Megan, then Byron.
Yeah, I want to come back to a comment that Andrew made about, if we just go with PHA here, like we sort of wasted our time. I think that is it's not the way I feel. I think that this process has been really important no matter what outcome we have. And if it's true that we feel that way, we probably shouldn't have even invited PHA to submit a proposal, right? So I just want to lay that standard that even if we come out at the end and PHA is the right group here, this was still a worthwhile process. And I like your point, Councilor Denton, that we could possibly be doing this again and maybe meet these friends down the road. I also want to just point out financially, just because again, it's the way I think. When I look at the per unit development costs, PHA was the only one below $400,000 a unit, which is $400,000 a unit is really expensive. 450, 486, that gets really, really expensive. And when we think about these just being preliminary numbers and knowing how construction pricing has trended over the last couple of years, you could potentially get into a situation where these numbers become untenable. And I have some concerns about developers promising something that they can't actually bring to the table because it becomes cost prohibitive. So I was really heartened to see that PHA had developed a plan that was, in my opinion, pretty reasonable.
Okay, we're going to go to Dig, and I did want to, because Jen brought it up, and not to pile on Andrew, but but when it comes to the pushback, I think it's hard to lay that on the doorstep of PHA. I mean, if we're going to put it on anybody's doorstep, I'd say put it on my doorstep in terms of being able to talk about that. That was the natural selection. They are the firm that has developed the Ruth Griffin. When we had this opportunity from council, even before ours, of talking about who would be partnering with that, PHA was the one. Obviously, like if we had this process, and this is a much better process, I think, at the outset of, receiving qualifications, talking about that, I think lessons learned would have gone a lot differently. I don't know if better, but it would have gone a lot differently. And so I really don't want to hold any, developer that was in on the ground floor when we were trying to see the opportunity here, hold that against them. I hope, and I would expect all of us to say blank slate, we're going to judge them based on the values that they're bringing. But, if we're blaming anybody, that's me for that.
Can I clarify my comment then? What I was trying to say is we shouldn't, in my opinion, pick somebody because they're local. We should pick somebody because they win based on not the score sheet. I think the score sheet's important, but I think, there's no overwhelming winner, let's say. We should pick the winner based on whoever we as a group feels won based on all of the proposals.
Yeah, I think based on the proposals, and we haven't discussed whether or not there would be an interview. I know that there's a time crunch. Any RFP I've ever been involved in, we've had the ability to ask questions of, participants, even if it's not all four, typically down select, to have a conversation with participants, because, there could be things that come out, like Jen's point, how is, like your cost is, above 400,000. How are you, looking to model that over the, if it doesn't happen for 3 years? Those are, questions that we might want to have more than one to be able to see how different firms react to that. But I'm talking more than I wanted to. So Dagan, then Megan, then Byron, then the system mayor.
I think we are in the good position where the two firms that came out on top, both in the scoring sheet but also in the proposals themselves, are also the more local firms. It's one of the stated intentions, and I hope I'm not speaking out of turn here, but something we've discussed a lot at the Blue Ribbon Committee is that we want to create neighborhoods. We want to create neighborhoods that fit with our community, and who better understands our community than people who live in our neighborhoods. I also think it's important to note that on a project like this, especially one that has this many eyes on it, this much attention, this much work that's gone into it, best is not always most. And both POA and PHA had very comprehensive plans that address community in much more detail than the others. In fact, I didn't get much in the way of community enhancements from Avesta or Pemrose. But if we are to go through with this project, and this is why I lean towards retaining the school and having a community space, if this is viewed as an asset to Portsmouth, then the likelihood of procuring more projects in the future goes up exponentially.
Thanks, Dagan. Megan, and then Byron.
So just one thing for like the folks here.
And do you mind just pulling that again? Because I know we can hear you. It's the folks at home.
For the people like watching at home and maybe who are here who haven't seen much of like the concepts, I didn't know if it would be helpful for us to kind of share them, because we're throwing around like POA and PHA just so people have like an idea. I think there was a slide deck, Howard, that you had emailed. But I just wanted to echo the same sentiment. Like it's really important that we have a good plan for community engagement, and I did appreciate that both POA and PHA did highlight that. So I just wanted to make sure that as you guys move forward with your decision, like you stress and you move forward with whatever timeline to make sure that that actually happens, and just hosting it in times and places that people can get to as well is going to be really important.
Thanks, Megan. And we will get to the presentation, want to get to, and it's good to have it before, we'll definitely get it before public comment, so we get, you don't have to guess if you've been here and you didn't have a chance to look at that. Can we go to Byron, Assistant Mayor, and John, and then we're going to just go through the presentation as was submitted to us.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I wanted to make a few points. I wanted to agree with Councilor Tabor and others around the priority being around generally the best score developer by the rubric, though I'm going to caveat that a little bit because I think something that wasn't in the rubric scoring was something that as like the school board member on this housing committee is important to me is that the development would attract families. And I didn't think that was necessarily laid out in the scoring rubric. So I think something that I'm looking at in these two plans, and I know that these are site plans and proposals, and lots of things change, but they do have a lot of detail in them. So I think focusing on the detail is appropriate. The number of 3-bedroom units in the POA, 8 in some of them, 7 in another, compared to potentially 40 in one of the PHA plans is a pretty striking difference. So I think that's something to consider. And I think it would be, and then as a follow-up, I think it would be good to have, before the decision is made, is to have more information or criteria around how the different plans would attract families. Like, I'm steeped in students per unit sort of numbers right now, and I think that's something that is lacking in the proposals here. That's my comment.
Thanks, Byron.
Well, Byron, you just brought up the point I was literally just about to bring up. I actually think that when I look at the PHA proposals, option 2 with the school remains and where the school doesn't remain, I love to see over 100 units. I love to see over 23 bedrooms. I'd love to see, over 32 bedrooms. I think, and Byron and I have a lot of these conversations, which is, I think there's a misconception in this, in the community because of some of the buildings that have gone up that our schools are overrun. We are losing school numbers. We are losing families at what I view as disturbingly aggressive rates. And so when I look at 2 and 3 bedrooms, I see families. And that is what our community desperately needs, is young families and kids in our schools. So to me, there is a huge difference of 70 units versus 100 units. That's 30 families that maybe wouldn't be able to stay in our community, would never be part of our community. I know that there has been a lot of conversation, even within our housing committee, of selection of residents and tenants. And I think everyone should be reminded that there's housing discrimination policies that take an effect of that. But one of the conversations we had in our committee is, why should somebody who lived here for 20 years, who was forced out and lives 15 miles down the road in another community, not have access to a home here again if they've lived here? Or they want to live here. I wasn't born here. I moved here 13 years ago. So by some of the comments that, get passed around, and I want to make sure that we keep an open mind too. I technically shouldn't have been able to rent my first apartment because I didn't live here. But I think it's so important to me, as also Councilor Tabor said, when we look at units, there is a statement from the Housing Committee about how many units we're looking to try to get permitted in our community over the next few years. So the bigger the dent we can make, especially, again, when I look at scenario number 2, when you have the school still remaining, you have just a 2.5-story building. You think about the eye line view. It's not obstructive. It's not, in my opinion, overbearing. But you get a lot of community out of that, and you get a lot of, ideally, families and kids, which I think, again, our community desperately needs.
John? Oh, then Councilor Moreau after that, and then maybe the presentation.
Just 2 quick comments. I want to pick up on what Councilor Tabor said. If you think about the neighborhood feel, and I think that's important, look at what we have. Just like the mayor, we grew up in the Crick, and if you look at the PHA housing on Woodbury Avenue. It fits in. It fits in. It feels like it's part of the neighborhood. It doesn't stand out like it's something that was dropped in there. So to be able to do something at Sherburne that feels like it belongs there, I think is important. The second thing I just want to mention is that as city councilors, as people who are involved in the city, one of the things that we have to keep in mind is the fiduciary responsibility we have to our citizens. So sometimes we can make business decisions, and sometimes we can make political decisions. But I think that the overriding factor that we have to take into consideration is what gives the best value for the tax dollars. So what is our fiduciary responsibility? And if we can do that by using someone local, fine. But again, that shouldn't, the fiduciary responsibility we have should be something that's taken into consideration. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Councilor Moreau.
Deputy City Manager, you mentioned the possibility of interviews. So I have some questions around that as far as how those would be conducted, who would be involved, would they be public, non-public, and also what would that do to the timeline?
So first, my recommendation is that they would be in a public meeting, so a setting like this, where the city council would have the opportunity to ask questions. I think we just need to decide on some format, whether you want 1, 2, or more proposers to appear. I think in terms of the timing, so I think if you could make, as I indicated at the beginning, selection of a preferred candidate by that last meeting in December, that would then get the ball rolling for the legal part to then happen into January and not lose too much time. So you've got a little bit of window of time if it is the desire of the city council to actually hear and maybe develop a list of questions in advance that maybe we could circulate to staff and just kind of have an orderly, at least a beginning of an orderly process in terms of who you want to hear from and topics. So,
May I add to that? Speaking of the timeline and the potential impact, let's go out to September of next year. And that's a date that needs to be met in order for some of this financing to be secured of whatever developer is selected. And retro-engineer back from that September, they need to have permitting accomplished through the city in order to have a clear and concise application for the tax credits. That permitting process may take 3 months, it may take 4 months. So now you go back, when that permitting process, you have the pre-application meeting with the technical advisory committee and the other elements in the city. And then you go earlier, closer down to December, where the awarded entity needs to go through a design process in order to have clear documentation of what they're proposing. And through all that is the requested robust community engagement process, as discussed in the RFP responses and tonight, where there's going to be back and forth. So it was mentioned that whoever gets awarded, they can take bits and pieces off of each successful proposal, and maybe that would be what the community accepts. So that process gets us right into January, pushing, and I'm emphasizing that timeline, pushing this out past December into January, we really start making it challenging for whoever is awarded and meeting their financial obligations. And it was mentioned that there's at least a month of negotiations that are going to go on. So.
Thank you, Howard. Going to go back to Megan, then Councilor Cook, and then Councilor Bagley. The presentation at some point at this evening. Megan.
Okay, thank you. Just kind of going off of Howard's latest comment, what is like the contingency plan, I guess, if somebody can't get the financing for whatever reason? Like what happens if we've already legally signed the lease to these folks?
So that's why there are negotiations to figure out how to secure the project and the performance of the parties.
Okay, that's helpful. And
So
then,
Megan, just a technical aspect of that.
Yeah.
In order for us to, we would have, as the council, have to sign that lease. So that's the whole, I guess the whole shoot match in terms of like something that's signed by the council would be a, public document that those things would have to be defined as for us to be able to sign that. So that would be a very public process in terms of not the negotiations, but when it's brought before the community, all of that would be spelled out before we're able to sign that.
okay, that's great.
And if I can just add, we have done this before with PHA. That's Connor's
Sure,
Cottage.
I understand that.
Okay.
The climate's a little different
Yes.
these days. so-
Yes, understood, but just so folks understand. Yeah.
Okay, we're going, Counselor Bagley. Oh, Counselor Cook, then Counselor Bagley. And then presentation. Every time I see presentation, somebody else raises their hand, so stop saying it.
Thank you. I have a question on process. We talk about having to go through all the land use board's process, even though we have a full public engagement process with any of the developers that we choose. There were public engagement plans. I want to know the legality of that requirement because it is on city municipal property. So my understanding is the municipality doesn't go through those processes.
Thank you, Councilor Cook. So what the zoning ordinance requires is that the municipality try to follow those processes to the extent practical. That's what it says in the zoning ordinance. So ordinarily we do try to follow those processes, as we can for municipal projects.
That was a lawyer answer.
That was a lawyer
so
answer.
it sounds like we do it. If we do it to the degree that there's not a requirement that it has, as I heard that, there's not a requirement, but a project that doesn't have robust, like if it doesn't go through like the robust community process and is not, supported in that, and then we somehow skip out on the land use, seems like that's a project it's going to be, it's not going to happen.
Right. And I think my question is really guaranteeing that we can get through that process in a timeline that does not delay projects. Can we set parameters on that process given that it is not legally required?
Certainly, we certainly make exceptions as appropriate. For example, there's a project going on at the Public Works facility, which is going through the TAC process, but is not going to the planning board, as an example.
Councilor Barty.
Yeah, I would just like to say that the process of going through the various boards will ensure, or at least help to ensure, that it is compatible with what the expectations are of the city and of the residents of the city. I think that's an important piece of it. They don't have to, but I think it's very worthwhile to do that. Also, I agree that projects that have more multi-bedroom facilities are very important in this process. That brings families.
Certainly agree. I think if we're balancing both the plan, like the approval board process versus the community input process, knowing that they can both be very robust. I think we can decide this, as it goes forward, but putting parameters around them both and how we're going to weight each of those is going to be certainly important. Councilor Cook, back to you, and then Councilor Bagley.
Yeah, I just want to clarify, I'm not suggesting that we not go through the process. I'm just suggesting that we make sure that we don't have unexpected delays. Yes.
Okay.
unnecessary delays.
Going to go to Eric and then Counselor Bagley.
At least my conclusion to some of the discussion up to now is that there's two firms that are emerging as possibly the preferred organizations to perform this task. This is a landmark project for the city. This is not going to take care of all the housing needs we have, so we better do it right the first time, because everything else that follows will be compared against this. I know there's been some mention with Howard's concern with making sure this goes as fast as possible with the developers, to help the developers, procure the type of funding that they're hoping to get. But how does that, between the two proposals, PHA and POA, it was distinguished that they had different type of writing styles, and one writing style impressed me better than another, especially with POA and their outreach. Their outreach program was, I think, very distinctive to know that they were going to go into the community as far as they could get to try and, tidy up some of the details of what their project might end up looking at. I think that's a very important component of this whole project. I just don't know how long that would take and how well it would fit against the other timelines of helping them move on with their procurement of funding. So that's kind of a question that doesn't really mesh up with me very, succinctly right now, but I know it's part of what's been discussed here. And at least from what I've heard, there's definitely two developers that are emerging out of this discussion. And I don't know if that narrows it to any other detail that needs to be discussed. They are conceptually two different, designs. One has a neighborhood feel to it. The other is a more, I don't want to classify it, it's the wrong word, maybe a project look to it, one big building. And they are dimensionally different in how they fit into that neighborhood. So, that's the distinction I make between the two projects.
So like just on just one clarifying, not as quickly as possible, right? That's possible is the key phrase. And the reason that Howard has mentioned in terms of the funding cycles from, the federal government in terms of some of those credits that are available. If you don't, you wait an entire year for that. And, from a standpoint of, probably the toughest calls I receive, and any of us receive, and I'm sure you receive them on the Housing Committee, is I can't afford to stay here any longer, and I need to, is there a list that I can get on? Those are the hardest things to be able to then say, we didn't try as hard as we could and move as fast as possible to reach that 1 year earlier than we could have otherwise. Knowing that, balancing that entirely against, we've created, a GNOD that will potentially give more opportunity to do these projects exactly. And if we don't get it right, this is going to be the last project that we do. That's the benefit of this being the first. It has to be the best because it has to set the bar for every other neighborhood to say, I want this in my neighborhood. Look at, say a splash pad or this, what PMAC or the community school coming into this place. There has to be a view of Portsmouth, of our joint session being like, we're thinking about housing. We're also thinking about how do we improve Portsmouth. Housing is a part of that. It's not the only part, but it's a big part of that for the people that we have here. Councilor Bagley and then the Assistant Mayor.
Thank you, Your Honor. And when we're talking about number of bedrooms, New Hampshire's, I think we all know, is very unique with our tax structure, and it falls primarily on the local property taxes to fund almost everything. Right now, we're at $23,800 on the average cost per pupil here in the city. My daughter's in the 12th grade. Every single year she's been in school, my property tax bill has been less than the cost per pupil. So when we add bedrooms, we're shifting the tax burden to families that don't have as many children. And next year, my daughter will be out of high school, so I'll be one of those families that's paying more in than not. But I do think we have to keep that in the back of our heads, that the more pupils we have, the higher the tax burden is going to be on all of us as homeowners. So we should try and find that right balance.
Assistant Mayor?
Well, I understand your point. I do not have children, and I pay taxes in this town happily. I mean, I don't live in the creek, but my taxes go to make sure that their sidewalks are safe. I don't live in the South End. My taxes go to make sure the community playgrounds are safe. So I would take an adamant and loud stance against that notion, and I would say I'm not alone in that. But my point that I really wanted to make, when we talk about, I keep hearing that this is the first time we've done a project like this, but I think it's not. There are several municipal buildings or formal schools or former city-owned properties that have gone into housing. I think we could walk outside and see one. And so I think we need to take off the notion that this is the first time we've ever turned municipal property into housing, especially affordable housing. We've done it half a dozen times in this community. This is the first time we've done it with such active community engagement, and I think we all know that that is because, as the mayor said, you can put the blame on us. The first time that this was brought into the community felt like intruding to some people. So that is why we slowed down and kind of developed this more community engagement aspect. But I wanted to touch on a comment, Eric, you had made when we talk about the different, and really what Jen had said, when we talk about the different design elements of the look, one of the things that Jen said that I thought was really eye-opening was the cost of development. So when we look at $400,000 a unit versus 5 or 6, adding in contingency, delay, inflation, you have to think about design cost and build cost versus aesthetic cost. And while I understand that's super important, I know some people may not agree. I live on Coakley. I consider myself part of that community. This development is directly going to affect my commutes to work, my place that I walk my dog every day. I understand that a lot of people think it only affects one side of, would say, Borthwick, but I think it affects more than that. But I think we have to think about that too. And I thank Jen for bringing up the point of the cost of construction. So when we look at, and we'll look at it next, I promise, the presentation, I want us to hopefully not get too caught up in aesthetics and the look of something, because that does add to the cost of it. So I just want to throw that out there as an opinion, that I think Jen made a really good point of the cost of construction. And when you look at an L-shaped building versus a bunch of smaller, I think that's where you get a huge amount of construction cost.
Response to that, just quick. I looked at that specifically and saw the square footage, the cost per square foot, and I said, how can POA do it without any expectation of the city providing additional funding, and PHA had a lower, cost per square foot, and was going to mothball a school, and still potentially it was in their list to ask for, to maybe request assistance from the city. That didn't mesh up with me. POA seemed to have taken that into account, even with the expense, and it was expensive per square foot, but it was different than it was different than the PHA application.
Mm-hmm.
So I did take note of that. I said, that's expensive per square foot.
Megan, is that a hand?
But it was a different result, too.
Yeah.
Just really quick, just to add on, I understand what you're saying about like aesthetics and cost, and I hear you because my tax dollars are being poured into various areas in the city. But I think it's also really important to make sure whatever addition is coming into the neighborhood is something that's beautiful and seen as a positive thing. And so I think aesthetics to an extent is important as we're looking at it.
Yeah. Of course, I'm not saying put up cardboard building. But I just think as we are part of the design criteria, I think we should make sure
Yeah,
we look at
we
the
just-
flow of a space.
I get it. We have put a lot of money into other areas in the city, so I just want to make sure that we're thoughtful about it. That's
Yeah,
all.
for sure.
Counselor Cook.
Thank you, Your Honor. As we're talking about aesthetics, the other thing we need to also consider is preservation of green space. I think that that's not always evident. You know, when you're looking at buildings, what does the building look like? What do the massings of the buildings look like? We need to also talk about preservation of space for not just the people who live in this location, but the people who live in the neighborhood. In this space. There are also some elements that were really interesting in these proposals that I want to call out tonight that weren't in the RFP for a measurement, but I think that they're really important proposals for the community to know about, no matter who we choose. The first was a recommendation to turn the school into live-work space for artists. And I can't tell you how important proposals like that are at the city. We, on the Arts and Cultural Commission, we have a whole working group dedicated to trying to find space in the city for artists, live-work space, because artists are continually being priced out of the city. It's one of the requests in our cultural plan, and what they have figured out at this point is generally we're going to require angel investors to be willing to invest money in us having live workspace for artists, because no one is going to build live workspace for artists. It's affordable for artists. So in order to do that, we have to rely on some form of public housing. And that's why this is a very important proposal. And I think everyone should take note of that. And it's something that we should consider not just here, but in the future for additional proposals for housing down the line. The other thing that I think is really critical, and this comes from the other developer, is this passive house model. You know, this is a really huge step forward in talking about not just green buildings, but really energy efficiency in the long term. And so we have some incredible elements here that we're looking at that don't marry up. You're not comparing one proposal that's the same to another proposal. There are different elements that make each of them very enticing. So those are the things that I'm weighing right now.
All right. Maybe time for the presentation. On that note, let's do it. Roll the tape.
So as the Deputy City Manager mentioned, we had these available. What we did was, and I'll walk through them if I can make the machine go, is to provide overviews, and this takes us alphabetically. So this would be Avesta, and this is the scenario, both with, without, and then with the reuse of the building. This would be Penrose reusing the building, and this would be Penrose without the building. And I'll pause here to say that while you see a fair amount of detail, these really are conceptual, so we can't stress that enough. This is Portsmouth Housing Authority's first scenario, and scenario 1A, and scenario 2. This is preservation of affordable housing, scenario 1A, reusing the building. It's 1B, a version of that. Scenario 2 without the reuse of the building. And then, as Suzanne also mentioned, and as all of this is available online on our website, this is a breakdown of how the master score sheet broke out by section. This is a section pertaining to site and building design. This is the section pertaining to the removal of the school. I'm sorry, the first slide was keeping the school. The third selection criteria box dealt with cost, budget, and financial feasibility. Next was property management and community engagement. And then I believe the last slide speaks to implementation, plan, and timeline. And at the bottom, although you can't read it here, you will be able to access it online. It shows the total of all scores with both scenarios considered. I'll stop sharing now, but I'm happy to go back to anything that people would like to see.
Can I see POA 1B. B1, 1B. And just in case people, where the community, the school is, the pink, what is that?
It says retaining the gym.
That is, so the other one is without the gym.
Correct. The other one, it shows an outdoor courtyard.
I just want to make sure everyone who's here can understand that difference in the audience.
And I'll just add for, because the gym was added later, the original school had no gym, and then that was added later. I did invite my friend Eric Chinberg to walk around the property and just ask his opinion if it was worth saving or, if the bones were good or not. His statement was the bones are good. Just him being one of the more premier developers of old buildings in New England, I thought he was a good friend to ask. Share that with the group.
That's great.
Just a comment
Councilor Bagley.
on the gym. Thank you, Your Honor. I think, I might be misremembering, but the reason they took out the gym was they still qualified for one of the types of grants the state awards for historic buildings because the gym wasn't part of the historic structure. And I thought that level of detail on some of the presentations about where they were going to get the funding and the resources, that to me showed a level that was, they really sussed out where the best resources were for the capital stack. And some of the presentations did a better job than others, but I think that was one of the areas where it highlighted that type of thing where you can get rid of the gym because it's not part of the historic structure and still qualify for the historic. I don't know if it was LCHIP or if it was a different historic grant.
It was both. Conservation tax credits, I think.
Yeah, conservation tax credits.
Are there other questions that we have? And again, this is a way to digest it. These have been on the website for 7 days, 9 days, 10 days, 10 days, almost 2 weeks. And so there's been some time to digest. Obviously, this is a good time to have as many questions, and I'm sure there's a lot of questions and people formulating more questions. There's going to be a housing committee. We're going to have public comment. There can be, and there will be more discussion after public comment before it gets back to the council. But Eric, and then back to Councilor Bellick.
One thing, and I know we've discussed a lot here, but one thing that wasn't specifically mentioned is any traffic implications that this particular project might cause. I know that if we look at the maps, each one of them probably had 118 to 130 parking spaces in each one of the proposals. And what that, if that was to be maximum, what are the traffic implications? We've only seen one example of it in a prior presentation some time ago, and I helps out of this, but it's a question I do have for whenever it comes up and whenever it needs attention.
I think the traffic part of that is going to be a part of the community engagement, and I think that's probably, I'm guessing, I think that will be a big question in terms of the community, of like what the impacts here versus what are the benefits. I know that I live in the Crick, as John has alluded to. I think the amount of traffic from West End Yards versus all the traffic of people cutting, between us, it's not necessarily from West End Yards. It's the fact that, it's coming through down Bartlett, getting stopped up at that intersection. There's a lot of traffic in Portsmouth, but I think talking about those 113 cars and what that's going to mean is a big part of the public engagement and getting confidence that this is something that is manageable for the neighborhood there. And then broader Portsmouth, there's other parts of that. Those cars are going to go somewhere else as well. And so having that broader conversation, I think, is a part, maybe not of this proposal because there was a traffic study done. It's about the community engagement around that. I think it's going to be a big part of that. At least I would expect it to be in terms of that.
Somewhere in the process, it'll have to be addressed.
Howard, you had your hand up on the traffic portion of that?
I do, and I'm going to give a segue afterwards.
Grab the mic.
Oh, you got to grab the mic a little bit, or else nobody's going to hear this awesome answer.
So, it's a good question, Eric. The proposal specifically did not want to require, for cost purposes, the burden to the proposal to provide and those type of services in their preparation. So it is expected and certainly warranted that a traffic study would be done during the process. And my segue is that, talking about the timeline and talking about negotiations, the entity that's awarded this opportunity will need for their own due diligence to go out and do certain things on the site, whether it be soil testing or other elements. So all that needs to occur prior to the city penning the final lease agreement. So that's another important part of what the timeline is. But those type of consulting, engineering and other efforts are certainly going to get done.
Thank you, Howard. Councilor Blaylock.
Thank you, Your Honor. And if we are going to offer questions to any of the developers, I know I would be interested if they could develop the school without city funds. And I know there's several different options we've been given, like taking the gym away, leaving the gym, and then also I saw the option of adding an addition to the back of the school. And then could you create a neighborhood feel, and what impact would that have on the number of units and the range, below AMI? And but those would be my main questions.
Any other questions before we get to public comment? I did just want to call out the number of units below, below market rate. As been said in the conversations, I think sometimes like affordable. What is affordable? This is not what's in the CRIC. It's not public housing. It's not a pay what you can model, but it's certainly significantly less what the market would demand in Portsmouth. And that is something that I think is, and even, with, public housing, like there is houses that are going up directly next to that are not necessarily affordable to, certainly I wouldn't be able to buy them. But they are unrelated to the fact that there's actual, public housing next to it has not affected the desirability of the CRIC neighborhood. In fact, I think it adds to the desirability of having a much, economically diverse background or neighborhood. So I want to credit all of them. Learned a little bit about, why we wouldn't have 100% AMI, and I think that was in POAs in terms of that you don't really get a much lower in terms of it would be tough to attract that, and it doesn't necessarily come out, and you probably should focus on the significantly lower. But in terms of being affordable units, these are well below what the market is going to get here, and I think that is a real positive for everybody that wants to be able to have a Portsmouth that's economically diverse, which I think is important, at least from my perspective. And I know to a lot of people, it's how we get there is the tricky wicket. Dagan, did you have something?
Yeah, just on that note, and thank you, Mayor, for saying that, because I agree completely. I have some skepticism about partnering with a for-profit entity, precisely for some of the reasons that you were discussing. The non-for-profits had multiple instances of addressing, like in the POA RFP, they water, sewer, heat, all paid for in their rent. And the ways in which those profits from the units start to generate, it goes back into the community rather than going into somebody's pocket.
All right. I think because I'm not getting any small hand signals or anything, large ones, why don't we open it up? Oh, is it? It's behind me again. Oh, this sucks. All right. Why don't we have public comment? There is, we don't have the buzzer, so we'd ask that you limit yourself in your head to, we could have a buzzer. but try to keep it within, it's always, brevity is also an effective communication strategy. So please come up, state your name, and any comments that you might have. And again, this is not the, certainly not the last meeting on this, and we're not able, because it's a work session, just want to keep saying that we're not going to be able to take a vote right after this. It's going to go to the Housing Committee for more discussion, where public comment, I believe, will have as well. There will be another conversation at the City Council level.
And if you're on Zoom and you wish to speak, please raise your virtual hand.
Public comment is open.
Hi, my name's, sorry. My name's,
sorry.
I'm so little. Can you hear me now? Okay. Hi, my name's Ryan. I live in the Ruth Lewin Griffin Place. Some of you, I know, Andrew, I had your daughter when she was a little peaker. I've actually worked for Seacoast Community School for 10 years. And I couldn't afford to live in Portsmouth if it wasn't for the Ruth Lewin Griffin Place. I had lived in Portsmouth and was before I moved in there, but it was an absentee landlord. It was with roommates. The building was in really bad shape. And when I had problems, I didn't know if I could get a heater put in. So we had days where our heat wasn't working. And it was right on State Street, right near downtown. And I was paying a ton of money for, an absentee landlord. So I think one of the things that I love about living in the Ruth Lewin Griffin Place is having a local landlord. Having people in town who are coming for maintenance. When I first moved in, for some reason, the fire alarms would go off at 7 a.m. We're right next to the fire station, so I wasn't super worried. But having maintenance be able to respond and knowing that the people in charge of maintaining my building for the next however many years that I live there are local people. Many of them grew up in Portsmouth, who work for the Housing Authority. So I think having a local landlord is very nice. And I want you to see the people who are moving into these places. Because I think when the presentation was made for the Sherburne Place, a lot of people heard projects. And I heard someone mention, not in a derogatory way, these buildings look more like a project, thinking of the projects of the 70s or on The Wire, the HBO show, because that's what public housing looks like. And I think it's important that when you do talk to the community, you emphasize the people who live in my building are their children's teachers, their children's paras, their children's librarians, their children's after-school care. Some of the people who work for Seacoast Community School, you guys talked about partnering for them, can't even afford to live in the Ruth Lewin Griffin Place. So I think it's important when you do go to the public, it be presented very carefully about the people who are moving in. Because a lot of people have an image of The Wire or the shows we've seen on TV or the failed projects. And this project can't fail. Portsmouth can't afford to fail if you want to continue to grow. Because you mentioned Seacoast Community School maybe being able to partner. We don't have the staff for that because they can't live close enough. So we really need to look at how important it is that you guys succeed. So when you make this decision on who you're going to work with, think about the fact that this is the future of Portsmouth. And that if you want the city to grow, your children to have teachers who can relate to them, teachers who go out of their way for them, you need to think about, can those teachers even afford to live in that community? And so this decision is a big one. I love the Portsmouth Housing Authority. I did actually go to school for urban studies and planning, but I did not get a chance to look at all the proposals. But I think it's important that you think about how this is presented to the community, because I can tell you right now, you've got a historic building. It's so easy for the community to derail a project using that. So I think it's important that you be very careful and look at how you're presenting this project to the community and the people who are moving in potentially. That's all. Thank you, guys. I'll see some of you guys in school tomorrow.
Thanks so much.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Bob Lister. I live at 69 Diamond Drive. And I just would like to thank you for the opportunity for all of us to speak and have some input. I would just like to say a couple things. One is that the proposals that I read, I was really impressed with the proposal that talked about reinvesting in the community and choosing someone who was going to be able to and not a for-profit, but a nonprofit, being able to think about community. During my tenure on the city council, I really tried to promote it's all about community. I did what I could to protect the neighborhoods, and that was really important for the people that live in the city. And we really need to take care of those people. You've heard this from many people before, I'm sure. I can't afford to live in Portsmouth anymore. Let's take care of some of those people and help them and listen to what they have to say. This is also very reminiscent of being in the career in education, where when we needed to hire a principal or a superintendent, there were always people who said, we need to go outside to get people. Even though we have people we've been training inside, we need to go outside and get people in. And sometimes that works. But I would just like to say that I think the Portsmouth Housing Authority has shown that they have a track record of doing things that we're talking about here. You certainly have some tough decisions to make, whether to keep the school or not keep the school. And you know that I spent a lot of time in that school, so I won't tell you how I feel. But you know how the community feels about that, as you just heard about a historic building. Is there some way to be able to work with that? And the last thing is that I think it was the assistant mayor who said that this is nothing new. The process is something new, that you're really looking for community engagement. This is nothing new to be able to talk about how we can develop something in the city. When I first came to Portsmouth, I believe there were 10 or 12 elementary schools. There are now 3. So what happened to all those buildings? And obviously that happened because of decrease in student enrollment and population and everything else. But if you look around the city, all those city buildings are all apartments, and people live in them, most of them. And that's because you went through a similar process and turned those over to the city, to the Portsmouth Housing Authority, and they have a track record of being able to have people stay in the community without being put on a mailing list, a list that is a mile long, and you hear that all the time as well. So in closing, I'd just like to say thank you for this opportunity. Go for the community engagement. I'm sure you're going to do the right thing. If you were to ask me, though, I would say I would favor the Portsmouth Housing Authority proposal. And thank you for all you're doing, and good luck.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Lister.
Good evening, City Councilors and Blue Ribbon Housing Committee members. My name is Grace Lessner, and I'm a Portsmouth homeowner, former renter, and resident here for over 24 years. I have worked professionally for more than 7 years as a supporter of and advocate for the development and preservation of affordable housing in New Hampshire. I would like to highlight 2 significant reasons I support Portsmouth Housing Authority as the developer of the Sherburne School property into affordable housing for the residents of Portsmouth. With PHA as a developer, it will ensure there is local experience, accountability, and control of the process and construction and rent-up of the property. This will benefit the city and the citizens of the city. Having Portsmouth Housing Authority as a developer also will have a positive economic impact for the city and will assist with the reinvestment into the community. Importantly, Portsmouth Housing Authority has proved itself to be a highly competent, resourceful, and responsive housing developer with the Ruth Griffin Place Workforce Housing Apartments on Court Street. I'm very familiar with the various phases, stops, and starts, and final success of the planning, construction, and opening of Griffin Place, including its financing complexities, work with key project partners, and community relations. I also have spent a significant amount of time in the building and know several families who live there, including Ryan. I believe Portsmouth Housing Authority has proven itself to be a competent developer and community partner and would be the best choice for the city's much-needed and next successful affordable housing development. And also to address some of the comments made previously about the relationship between school enrollment and building additional housing. If you're not already familiar with this, New Hampshire Housing commissioned a study recently that was released a couple of months ago on the impact of housing development on school enrollment. It's called From Homes to Classrooms, the Relationship Between Housing Development and School Enrollment in New Hampshire. It is well worth a read. I encourage all of you to become familiar with it. It is posted on nhhousing.org. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Your Honor, we have a hand on Zoom.
All right. Genevieve. The floor, can you hear us?
Yes. Hi, I'm Genevieve H. I live on 47 Orchard Street, and I am on the Arts and Cultural Commission. I'm also a professional artist. I've lived in this city for almost 50 years. And the only reason I can afford to live in the city is because I have incredible landlords who offer me affordable housing. I just wanted to echo what Councillor Cook said about taking into consideration the proposals that have artist live workspace. We've done, as part of our calling with the commission, is to support the pillars that are in the cultural plan. And one of the major ones is making sure that there is availability for keeping artists in the city. We bring in $70.2 million into the city of Portsmouth. That's the last Arts and Economic Prosperity Survey, and yet many of us cannot afford to live here. So any proposal that includes that, I think, should be strongly considered. The second thing I want to say is from a personal point of view. My mother is 94 years old, and I'm her primary caretaker. And the only reason that she can live in this city where I can be close to her is because of the Portsmouth Housing Authority and the assistance that they give us, not just financially, but tremendous support, always available, always there. And I just would like to give a personal plug for them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Genevieve. Any other comments from the public? Okay. Any other comments or questions of the council or the Blue Ribbon Housing Committee?
Your Honor, if I know we're not allowed to take any official votes, but the Blue Ribbon Housing Committee doesn't have a meeting scheduled, and I would take a straw vote if people would be available next Thursday so that we can continue this discussion.
I'm not.
Okay.
I'm out of town.
Okay. If you think you could be available in the Housing Committee, if you just raise your hand, and then, okay.
There is a planning board meeting that night?
Yep. We always wrap before planning board.
9:37.
Yep. Okay. So I just wanted, while we were all here, to kind of get a straw vote, as they call it, to see. I understand, John, Mr. O'Leary, you're out of town.
It's going somewhere warm, John?
I'm I don't work very often, but that's a working day.
Okay, good to, no, you're still getting some gainful employment there. Excellent. Okay, so I would hope that the Blue Ribbon Housing Committee to have some recommendations. It seems like there's a drifting, and I think Eric pointed this out to the top two, strong preferences from the folks that did speak. Obviously, that's not representative of all of the Portsmouth community, but those who are here, the local ability in terms of being able to place people and the experience therein. I think it was also noted that the economic benefit maybe to those the Portsmouth Housing Authority to have another, either modest, be able to reinvest in other properties, not insignificant. I think the neighborhood feel of POA was something that was strongly responded. Would love to hear from the Housing Committee before the next council meeting. I don't know even if it's possible to hear how if we create a conversation and questions, what they would say now that they've heard, or seen the other responses. That's something that I definitely, like, everybody that put in a response, would be great to hear what they have to say about other responses. That was a part of the reason why we weren't able to give these responses out as immediate as we got them, was in part because if you got them, if we got all the responses and we immediately get them out before there was any chance to discuss them, or that they were even all done, we would have probably seen one response that everybody kind of commingled around because of the fact that, I wish I had done that. And so being able to hear what some of the respondents would say after those, seeing the other respondents, I change my mind all the time. And if I could say, oh yeah, we could definitely do that, or we could partner on that, those would be things that I'd like to be able to hear, especially given what we've heard here tonight. So I think the next step is going to be the Housing Committee next Thursday. From there, a recommendation that the council will take up on the second of December, knowing that in order to be able to meet some of the deadlines, it's 2 weeks after that we would need to make a decision to move forward. And that's not a final decision on the design. Like, really need to stress that, I mean, as strongly as possible, that we're trying to get the best. The best means a lot of things. Could mean artist housing, could mean partnering with a child care facility, also meaning getting places for child care providers to be able to live. All of those things have to come into making the best. What we're looking for is who's going to give us the best ability to get to good enough to move forward. And I mean good enough because there's trade-offs. This is not going to be perfect. It's going to be good enough to satisfy as many people as we can, and that's the goal, because we can't make perfect. Perfect is literally the enemy of not only the good, but the future of having affordability in this house, or in this community, in any way, shape, or form. So look forward to that from the Housing Committee. I think and Suzanne is looking at me like, wait, you might have missed a step. So Suzanne.
So for purposes of clarity, are you looking for input from one or two or more of the proposers on some of the issues that were discussed tonight? And if so, how do you want that input? Do you want me to reach out and see if they can appear at the Housing Committee? Or do you want me to look with the city clerk and the city council for an opportunity for them to appear in a forum like this, or just in front of the city council? So, because I did hear, we wish we had more information from the proposers potentially, and I just want to be clear about how you would like us to move forward, because I'm sure people have schedules and would need to calendar.
Yeah, those things.
I think, and again, I would look for a straw vote. There could be, I would like to be able to ask people in person a couple questions. So maybe at the Housing Committee, and instead of a full recommendation, we come up with questions that we would like to ask, and then we have another potential work session with the top two with the council, and we can ask some of the questions proposed from the the committee and any questions counselors have. I'm not sure how that fits in the timeline.
Councilor Bagley, you got a timeline? You got to figure this all out timeline-wise?
I'm thinking, kind of to the assistant mayor's point, if the housing committee maybe selected the top two, or if they thought they were top three or whatever, and then whoever they chose would then come to the next council meeting and we could ask questions of those people, might be the most expedient way to do it.
That makes sense.
Instead of picking a top two, could we just go with the top two? If we're going to
Speak into the microphone, otherwise we can't.
Yeah, we're not picking, we're just going.
instead of deciding on the top two to ask questions from, I think it's pretty clear from today's conversation and in the numbers which two we mean. So maybe just skip that step of deciding in the housing committee which two to ask more questions to, and just ask those questions.
Yes, so we can develop some questions.
Yes.
And then we can, I'm just thinking the timeline. If we develop the questions, then when would we?
I think it really comes down to.
Would we make a motion at the next city council to invite those two back?
So I think that between now and Thursday,
it out.
the housing committee should create questions that you want to. It's difficult to have a meeting to have questions. I think there's a lot of questions that remain, out here. And again, if there can be questions that are asked of that, it doesn't have to, again, I think the more public that conversation is, the better. Of the top two, as were, I guess, defined here as PHA and POA, preservation of affordable housing. I think that would be a reasonable use of the time to get their feelings on the things that were, outlined, and then have, if not it might be difficult to have a recommendation. If there's a recommendation that's clear from that, fantastic. Please make that to the city council. But if there's not, to have the questions, I think will be a useful exercise, given that we can't convene a city council meeting, very easily, to be able to do that. And sitting up on the dais, it's not for, it just doesn't, we could have a work session, but then you guys are having a work session. So being able to have those, and if any counselors have a question that needs to be asked, please send it to the housing committee for that question to be asked through the liaisons that are on the council, so that we make sure that those questions are asked. Councilor Denton.
I was simply going to add that if we were to have the top two come to the December 2nd City Council meeting, it may make sense to use a similar format that we used when we interviewed the city manager, where there's essentially two separate sessions in a row where the candidate sat out and didn't hear the responses of the other candidate. That way it was fair to everyone, so they couldn't just give a better answer than the person who was cold asked the question.
I mean, I want that. I guess I love the process. I want the process to get the best for Portsmouth. So I don't want to get the best process. I want to get the best housing that we can. If that means somebody steals an answer and makes it better, that's fantastic for me. If it means that they are making that collaborating on that, whatever is there, the RFP has been submitted as far as I am concerned, to be able to get the best answer. I just don't want to make sure that we, from a process standpoint, we have a RFP, we submitted that, we have that, now it's, we're, I guess, down selecting to that, and to be able to deliver the best benefit to Portsmouth is what I'm looking for.
Would it make sense to, with the council questions, with our questions, submit them, have responses back before the December 2nd meeting for the council to be able to review, for them to be made public, and then the council can make a vote. Ideally, we would have a recommendation after those answers are received, and then the council would make a vote on the 16th.
So just written responses and not in person?
I mean, I don't know how.
I'm just trying to clarify. To make sure
that's what I'm saying, based on kind of the timeline. We can invite them to the December 2nd, so if there's clarifying questions that need to be asked, but we would have the written answers by the December 2nd meeting. We can invite them if there's, again, clarifying questions that people want to ask, and that way the council could be fully informed to be able to make a vote on the 16th.
Okay.
Sorry, McCoy.
Gonna let the lawyer go first, Eric, and then sorry, you could say something super.
Thanks, Mayor. Just a very quick point, just to avoid potential right to know violations. If you could just direct questions to the city manager, perhaps that would be best instead of sharing them between yourselves.
I guess
Because the mayor had said, if you have questions, send them to someone.
well, we were saying send them to the city, send them to the housing committee. So send them to us, and so the housing committee will submit all the questions, including with the city council questions.
Sure. I guess what I'm recommending is maybe they go to the manager and
Okay.
she can give them to the staff liaison.
Great.
and-
10 out of 10.
Thank you.
Eric?
We're getting lost in some of the process here. I
Sure.
think. In trying to
We're developing it
In
as we
trying
go.
to simplify it, would it make any sense? We seem to have a preference of two of the developers. I think there's been a strong, discussion of that. Could those two developers be at the next Thursday's meeting for the housing committee to ask them questions, and those questions are answered from the housing committee, portrayed to the city council, and the city council can have their time with them.
My only concern with that, Eric,
I
is
just
that-
thought it would simplify it.
Well, my only concern with that is I like the questions in writing, because I think there's going to be some detailed questions that people have, and so I think it's fair to give them time to respond adequately. A good example is I don't know much about square footage building, and now I'm going to go home and research, and I might have very in-depth questions that the representative they send may not be able to have what I deem as an accurate question. So I have a strong preference for us to be able to send them questions and get a response back.
Without them being there physically at the next Thursday's meeting?
Correct. At next Thursday meeting, we as a committee would select and decide questions to ask them. To issue.
That would be presented to the city council?
How about this as a straw man?
It seems to be kind of weaving in and out of.
Yeah, I think if we just, okay.
Housing Committee meets next Thursday, we develop questions, and if we can, out of that process, we come to a clear consensus and can make a recommendation, the mayor would like that. We develop those questions, they go to the city council soon enough to be in the packet for December 2, and maybe Councilor Detton's idea of 20 minutes apiece, those questions with representatives of POA and PHA.
Not going to say that's exactly what I said, but might be.
But does that work?
Well, I think, Suzanne?
Might I make a suggestion that the questions that are developed from the housing committee go directly to the firms so that they have more time to respond, and then all of that comes back to
That's
the
more
city
efficient.
council on December 2nd, and we ask representatives of POA and PHA to be present, and we will give some consideration at a staff level of how to structure the agenda to make sure that that works for the evening.
Yeah.
Okay. Councilor Monroe, and then,
I'm just wondering, are they going to submit us written answers that would be in our packet?
Yes.
Okay, so then we could do follow-up if we need to, if we have them in person.
I like that idea.
okay.
I'm just going to agree with that idea that we need to.
Let me just suggest with the timing, because your city council packet is being done on the 25th, is when we have our deadlines, 25th, 26th. You might not get the answers to those. I'm concerned about the timing there, that they might not be able to get us written answers for everything by the 25th. You might get them, it depends what the questions are, right? You might not get answers until that evening that we could distribute in advance. I'm just cognizant of timing. Yeah.
Okay. Howard?
Sorry, I don't want to rub salt into this in any way, but I just seek some clarification through discussion perhaps of the questions are going to be sent out. If they get sent out to the proposal respondents for clarification that they're only meant to provide information back in response to the question, and that they're not going to be allowed to provide any supplemental information in some format. It's just to seek clarification.
Wait, I guess, why would, if there, I guess like if there's some secret or some amazing thing that could happen, and we don't ask about it, I don't want that to be a limitation of that thing not happening. I guess
Well,
that's that would be my concern in like limiting. I think if there's a question and they want to expand in any way, like just so it's public. I'd like to have as much information as possible.
I agreed, and to clarify what I was saying, they wouldn't be allowed to present another scenario.
Alternative plans.
Or alternative plan.
I don't know why they, I mean, if there's other than that, I guess like I would be concerned that if in part when you're responding to an RFP, or when you're asking an RFP, and like many people here I've engaged in RFPs, sometimes a goal of an RFP is you think you have every idea that's possible out there, and you ask those questions in a way to get responses to what you think. And it was a good RFP. I think everybody knows that. But if there's something that's out there that they have expertise in building this, and like, you didn't ask this question that you should have asked, that seems like something that should be, we want to know that. We don't want to limit it so much that we don't hear about a better potential opportunity. Given that we have, two participants, I just don't think that we'd want to limit it if they have some other idea that could be that we should be considering. I don't see why we would limit that in the response. Councilor Cook?
Your Honor, my biggest concern with that time frame and allowing more information to come in is that essentially you're putting people in a position that you're asking them to work heavily over the Thanksgiving holiday. If they're allowed to present new proposals, you're going to have some people who feel that they have to now present a new proposal over the Thanksgiving holiday to get it to us for the December 2nd meeting. I think that's a really tight timeline.
And I think what is answered is going to be dictated by what we decide in our group. So it may be, are you willing to break up a large building into smaller buildings? And if so, would you be open to that? Or if that's a preference? Well, that doesn't necessarily mean that we need a new site plan, or saying, would you be amenable to increasing the number of 3 bedrooms? That does not mean that we need a new site plan. There are questions that could be answered without providing new documents. Because that's what I assume, when we're talking about presenting different things. I just brought up 2 scenarios that were objections of each plan that, verbally can be, or written can be said,
Councilor Bagley.
Say no.
I guess I agree with all 3 of you, so I don't know how to square the circle, but I worry if you say I'm willing to break up into multiple buildings, I feel like you would have to do a fairly detailed cost analysis, which then lends itself to almost doing a new proposal. So maybe I would look to the legal department. Would it be typical for us to limit the type of responses, or would we typically open it back up?
People have, I don't know if this is,
This is part of community engagement, because the community may come back and say, we want more 3 bedrooms, and then what are we going to say to the developer we selected? No, your plan only said 7 3-bedrooms. Sorry, we know the communities.
So if there was an open dialogue between 2 people, I think part of the problem of not just having the people come to the housing committee and ask questions directly of them is that we're trying to create formality around something that's difficult to have. I do think, definitely take, I take the point that if we open it up to allowing anything to be responded, it's going to, it could create some other thing that would make this process harder. I'm comforted by the fact that there's maybe a week to do that. And so it's going to be limited. Like, we're in the zone of acceptability here, and we've narrowed it to 2 firms that can respond to that. So I don't think that there is necessarily a huge concern around that. I guess I would caveat my phrase by saying that if there's something that should be considered that we did not take into account in this, that would like to know about that, and instead of taking that and saying, well, it wasn't asked, but there's this real big thing that you should have thought of that wasn't in there. We didn't ask, so that's, I don't want to caveat, so if we're going down the path of having strong written responses, then I would lean towards more just having the folks come to the housing committee, and if there's questions that we want to ask live, then we'll try to get them a deadline of Tuesday to be able to think about those constructively before being asked live, instead of trying to create more of a rigid process around having all of the formalized responses that exist. Councilor Tabor?
For our housing committee Thursday, wouldn't it make sense if we ask questions based on the existing responses that we've gotten?
Yeah,
That's what we should be.
I think my concern is if I think we need to develop the questions as a committee before we just have people come in and answer the questions.
That was my point. If we're gonna create questions next Thursday,
Microphone.
and the developers aren't there to make some answers, then it limits us to make any type of decision on what might be the preference of the housing committee. Because we're going to ask the questions that'll be answered later on, and so the housing committee will be it won't have enough knowledge to make any type of decision to the city council of what their preference
We'd be
developer.
looking for, we'd get, if you look at the timeline, we'd develop the questions, we'd get at least answers to some of the questions, whatever submittals that the developers could by the 2nd for the city council. Then the housing committee and the council would have 2 weeks to review those questions. If the housing committee decided to make a recommendation, they could to the council on the 16th, and that is where the council would make a decision.
I just thought I'd shorten the road to next Thursday, that they could be there for us to ask questions, and
I guess I just think that as a committee, we should flesh out questions, because what we don't want is to have one question that dominates the hour-and-a-half meeting when we all have valid questions that we would like to be answered. And I think as a committee, we should vote what questions come forward.
And there's a benefit to having written questions go to the developer and come back in writing and be public.
I think one more point too, as we go into our Thursday meeting, is I think we also will have some questions for the selection committee, because Jen highlighted an important point of something that we didn't see in the scoring rubric, and so I'm wondering if that actually might be more of what we're looking for than actually hearing from the developers themselves.
That's a great point, Megan.
John?
I want to get back to what Andrew said at the beginning of the meeting. I think, from my perspective, all of these questions are good, valid questions. What the city council needs to do is choose a firm, sit down with that firm, go through all of the scenarios, and put something together. Right now, you're just flailing all over the place. So my thought is, as Andrew expressed early in the meeting, decide how you're going to choose the firm. I'm sure that when you ask a question, as the assistant mayor said, will you break down the building, into smaller units? Everyone's going to say yes. So let's choose a firm, figure out the process, and then these questions are all very valid questions. Sit down with the person, because you're going to have to go through that process, as the assistant city manager said, to put together a legal document, and that's all part of the process.
Councilor Boyle.
Thank you, Art. No, I just kind of, to back on what Mr. O'Leary said, we've already seen their comparison with no school, how that would affect the number of units. But yeah, if we're going to ask these firms, can you create a neighborhood feel, they're going to say yes. The real question is, can you create a neighborhood feel? How many units would that cost? Or how many units, how many, there's always going to be a give-take, right? And how expensive would that get? But I just hope the questions are into detail about that, not just broad.
I can assure you, I think the committee and the makeup of this committee is specifically to make sure these questions are targeted. And we also have Howard, who is our housing navigator, who navigates us literally through these things. So that, yes.
Okay, so plan thus far then is for the Housing Committee to meet on Thursday and decide on questions to ask of the proposers or the two firms and have those responses back by the December 2nd City Council meeting. Councilor Butler.
Will the firms be at the December 2nd meeting? The two firms? So the City Council can ask some questions, or are we going to ask some questions on the 16th when we would actually be making the decision?
Yep, I would guess at the moment that the firms, if they're able to respond to those, to the questions that are created on Thursday by December 2nd, would be there. That would be, but I don't know what those questions are going to be. If they asked for more time based on the specificity of the questions, that it's tough to set that agenda. That would be the expectation, though, is to be able to hear those questions of any follow-ups of that. Yep.
I would encourage the council to get in front of the potential developers sooner than later, so we can start asking questions. I'd hate for them to get in front of us the first time, December 16th, when we're making the decision, and then it turns into a four-hour night or something. But I would, what I mean? I'd like to let's get the ball rolling.
Also, a reminder to the council and a request before Thursday, any questions you have, please send to the city manager so that she can also send them to the housing committee, so we can make sure we're not duplicating and make sure we're covering all the ground of questions that we would want from these two developers.
Yeah, December 16th, if it's like the holiday concert in here, so we want to be able to do this justice. I hope that the robust conversation is on the 2nd, and would expect and so the question should be there. There's time between the 2nd and the 16th. If, for whatever reason, there needs to be potentially further recommendation, having heard that discussion and that questions of the Housing Committee, could still have that before the selection on the 16th at the absolute latest, based on the timelines that Howard outlined.
Wonderful.
Well, thank you. I just want to end with saying thank you to all the participants that submitted proposals. I want to thank the city staff that read through all of those proposals. I think between 62 and 140 some odd pages, there's a lot of material that was in there. Thank you. I do hope with the further zoning amendments that we'll take up at the next council meeting, there's an opportunity for more, or for the city to acquire more more developable land for this exact purpose, and to be able to support a process that goes forward in the future, engaging more of the firms that applied here today, and want to get it right, so we continue to be able to get it right as we go forward. So thank you all. Appreciate the time. And with that, I will close the meeting.